Don't leave me. The voice rasped through the stone corridors, echoing in Evelyn Hart's chest like a warning and a plea all at once. She froze, heart hammering, as the icy wind from the shattered windows swept across the abandoned tower chamber. Moonlight spilled through the cracks, illuminating the jagged edges of the ancient stone, casting long shadows that twisted across the floor where the great creature lay. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. This was not the first time she had been brought to a situation beyond her understanding, but something about the desperation in that low, trembling tone rooted her to the spot. The air smelled of frost and damp earth, and the faint, uneven rise and fall of the creature's chest made her step closer, every movement measured and careful, as though the wrong shift of weight might shatter what little stability remained. Her gloved hands brushed against the cold floor as she knelt beside him, feeling the subtle heat radiating through his form, the faint pulse of life beneath the thick, coarse fur. Despite the fear she felt, the stories told of those who had entered this chamber and never returned, she felt an unfamiliar thread of resolve weaving through her chest, tugging her forward. Her mind raced, recalling every lesson her grandmother had whispered during long winter nights about courage, about the quiet strength that lay in persistence when all else seemed lost. Evelyn's blue-gray eyes, wide and glistening in the moonlight, scanned the creature's massive form, taking in the sharp angles of his snout, the drooping ears, and the low rumble that seemed more like a plea than a threat. She noted the delicate arch of his clawed limbs, the tension in the muscles that betrayed both exhaustion and unspoken pain. No one had told her that creatures of power could feel fear, that beneath the exterior of strength and legends, there might be a spark of vulnerability that only the attentive could see. And in that moment, she understood it without explanation. She understood that he needed her presence, her warmth, and perhaps her belief in him more than anything else. Her hand, unloved now, hovered above his coarse fur, trembling, with a mixture of fear and determination. Yet she made contact, letting the heat of her fingers press into him as though transferring all her quiet courage, her promise to remain. The room seemed to shrink around them, the wind stilled, and the shadows softened as if the world itself had paused to watch this silent covenant unfold. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to flee the stories of failure and danger, but Evelyn's heartbeat matched the rhythm she imagined of his own, tentative yet resilient. "I'm here," she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if speaking aloud would lend weight to the fragile life she now protected. The creature's low rumble shifted into a softer note, a sound almost human in its plaintive quality, and Evelyn felt the first faint release of tension in her chest, the tiny lift of hope that had seemed impossible just moments before. She settled beside him, the chill of the stone floor biting through her cloak, yet she welcomed it as a reminder that she was alive, that he was alive, and that their fates, however uncertain, had converged on this night. Outside, the wind howled against the crumbling walls of the tower, carrying with it the distant echo of trees swaying in the winter dark. But inside, in this frozen chamber, all that existed was the fragile warmth shared between a girl who refused to leave and a beast whose survival now depended entirely on her. As the hours crept forward, Evelyn adjusted her position carefully, mindful of every shift, every movement, aware that even her smallest gesture mattered. The moon traced its path across the sky, and still she stayed, her resolve unwavering, hands lightly pressing against him to maintain life, breath intermingling in the quiet, each heartbeat a testament to courage not proclaimed but lived. In the stillness, she thought fleetingly of those who had doubted her, who had scorned her quiet strength, and she felt a surge of clarity. Tonight was not about recognition or reward. Tonight was about presence, about the small, steadfast choices that defined the heart of an Omega who had been overlooked, underestimated, and yet stood ready to protect what others deemed impossible to save. And, through it all, the creature remained, eyes closed, listening to the steady rhythm of her breaths, trusting the touch of a girl whose courage was invisible to the world but undeniable in the cold, silent night. The beast slept at last, but Evelyn did not. She sat with her back against the freezing stone wall, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, afraid that if she closed her eyes for even a moment, the fragile peace surrounding them would disappear. The moon had drifted higher outside the broken tower windows, silver light washing across the chamber and turning everything pale and dreamlike. Yet her thoughts were far from peaceful. They carried her back to the place she had spent years trying to escape. Ash Hollow was less than 30 miles away, hidden beyond the pine-covered ridges and frozen streams of the Northern Territories. It was the pack she had called home for 22 years. The pack that never truly wanted her. Evelyn had learned early that being an Omega meant existing on the edge of every room. Others spoke over her, around her, and sometimes through her, as if she were not even there. While young wolves trained for leadership, hunting, and glory, she was given quieter tasks. She cleaned gathering halls after ceremonies. She mended torn cloaks. She carried supplies while others received praise. At first she believed kindness would earn acceptance. She smiled when others frowned. She helped when nobody asked. She listened when others needed comfort. But years passed, and nothing changed. Her gentleness was mistaken for weakness. Her patience was mistaken for insignificance. The final blow came 3 months earlier during the winter gathering. Hundreds of wolves from neighboring packs had arrived for the annual celebration. Evelyn remembered standing near the edge of the crowded hall, holding a tray of hot cider while laughter and music filled the air. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this year might be different. Instead, she overheard a conversation that settled deep inside her heart like ice. "She is invisible," one young wolf had said. "Not invisible," another replied with a laugh. "Just forgettable." The words had not been cruel by intention. That somehow made them hurt more. Nobody defended her because nobody noticed she was there. Nobody realized she had heard. That night, Evelyn returned home and stared at her reflection for nearly an hour. She searched for some flaw that explained everything. But all she saw was a young woman with pale skin, soft brown hair, and tired blue-gray eyes. There was nothing extraordinary about her. Yet there was nothing wrong with her either. For the first time, she wondered if the problem had never been herself at all. The memory lingered as she looked toward the sleeping creature stretched across the chamber floor. Unlike everyone back home, he had looked directly at her. Even through exhaustion and pain, he had seen her. The realization felt strange. Dangerous, even. She shifted her cloak tighter around her shoulders and glanced toward the massive wooden door. No guard stood outside. No servants checked on them. The kingdom had abandoned hope long ago. Whoever occupied this tower was considered beyond saving. Evelyn understood that now. She had been chosen because she was expendable. If she failed, nobody would mourn. If she vanished, life would continue exactly as before. Yet sitting beside the sleeping beast, she felt something unexpected. Not fear, not resentment. Purpose. A sudden movement drew her attention. One enormous ear twitched. The creature exhaled softly and turned his head toward her even in sleep. Instinctively, Evelyn reached out and rested her hand against the thick fur along his neck. The tension immediately eased from his body. Her eyes widened. Somehow he knew she was still there. Somehow he trusted her. Outside, the wind continued its lonely song across the mountains, but inside the ancient tower, a forgotten Omega sat beside a sleeping beast and realized that for the first time in her life, she no longer felt invisible. The first hint that something was wrong arrived just before dawn. Evelyn had not realized she had drifted into a light sleep until a deep sound vibrated through the stone beneath her. Her eyes opened instantly. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then the freezing tower, the moonlit chamber, and the enormous creature beside her came rushing back. The beast had not awakened, but his breathing had changed. The slow, steady rhythm she had listened to throughout the night had become uneven. Concern tightened her chest. She carefully shifted closer, ignoring the stiffness in her shoulders and the ache in her legs from sitting on the cold floor for hours. Her hand rested against the thick fur along his side. The warmth she felt earlier was fading. "No," she whispered softly. "Please do not do this." The word surprised her. She barely knew this creature. She did not know his name. She did not know why he had been abandoned in this forgotten tower. Yet the thought of losing him filled her with a sadness she could not explain. Outside, pale gray light was beginning to push against the horizon. Snowflakes drifted past the broken windows, carried by a bitter northern wind. The storm had returned. Evelyn glanced toward the fireplace at the far end of the chamber. Long ago it must have filled the room with warmth. Now it stood empty and cold. The servants had stopped caring about this place years ago. Perhaps they had stopped believing years ago as well. She looked back at the beast. His ears twitched faintly. His body trembled once before becoming still again. A knot formed in her throat. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. She remembered being 8 years old and finding an injured songbird beneath a cedar tree behind her family cottage. The bird had been small and frightened. Everyone told her it would not survive. Yet she had carried it home anyway. She spent days feeding it drops of water and keeping it warm inside a box lined with blankets. When the bird finally flew away, her grandmother had smiled and said something Evelyn never forgot. Kindness is not measured by the outcome. It is measured by the choice to stay. The memory lingered as she looked at the creature before her. Maybe that was why she remained. Not because she believed she could save him. Not because she expected a miracle. Simply because leaving felt wrong. The beast shifted again. This time his eyes opened. Evelyn froze. Even in the dim light, they were striking. Not wild. Not cruel. They carried exhaustion deeper than anything she had ever seen. For several long seconds they stared at one another. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Then something unexpected happened. The creature slowly lowered his head until it rested against the stone floor closer to where she sat. The movement was small, almost hesitant. Trusting. Evelyn felt her breath catch. He was not asking for help anymore. He was accepting it. A faint sound escaped him, softer than before. It was not the voice she had heard earlier. It was simply a quiet acknowledgement that she was there, that he knew she had not abandoned him. Without thinking, Evelyn reached forward and gently brushed her fingers through the fur between his ears. The tension in his massive frame eased immediately. The effect was undeniable. Whatever burden he carried, her presence seemed to lessen it. She swallowed hard, trying to understand what she was witnessing. Then the first golden rays of sunrise slipped through the shattered windows and touched the chamber floor. The beast closed his eyes once more, but this time something felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the tower, the mountains, and the kingdom beyond were waiting for something that had not happened in a very long time. The tower was silent except for the faint sound of the beast's even breathing, a rhythm that had somehow become comforting to Evelyn despite the chill and isolation surrounding them. Outside, the first hints of sunlight stretched across the horizon, reflecting off the icy peaks of the northern mountains and painting the snow in hues of gold and pale blue. Evelyn shifted slightly, adjusting the heavy folds of her cloak to ward off the bite of the cold stone beneath her. She watched the creature, now still, and thought about the countless stories she had heard growing up in Ash Hollow. Stories of rulers and kings whose power was unmatched yet whose lives were lonely, and of creatures bound by fate who never found solace. Her mind wandered to her own journey, how she had always been on the periphery, a shadow moving quietly through the world, unnoticed and underestimated. She had been told that Omegas were delicate, easily broken, and that strength lay only in dominance and command. Yet here she was, beside a being stronger and more formidable than any alpha she had ever known, and she was keeping him alive not through force or magic, but through a simple, steadfast choice to remain. She pressed her hand lightly against the beast's flank, feeling the subtle warmth that hinted at life within, and a strange calm washed over her, deeper than any fear, any hesitation she had ever known. Memories of earlier winters in her childhood home floated unbidden into her mind. The way she had tended the wounded animals she found along frozen forest paths, the quiet nights spent watching over them until they could move on, until they were safe. That same instinct, that same impulse to nurture, guided her now. She realized that her presence was more than comfort. It was purpose, a tether holding together a fragile thread of life that might have otherwise unraveled. Outside, the wind whispered across the desolate peaks, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and frost. But inside the chamber, time seemed to suspend itself, the world reduced to the small space she shared with the massive form beside her. Every subtle movement, every measured breath was magnified in significance. She thought of the pack she had left behind, of the eyes that never saw her, of the voices that never spoke her name, and for the first time she understood that survival was not always about escaping danger. Sometimes it was about choosing where to stay, about choosing to bear witness, to provide warmth and presence when everything else seemed to vanish. The beast stirred slightly, a soft rustle of movement that did not startle her but drew her closer, prompting her to adjust her position to be nearer, to offer what comfort she could. The room, cold and gray, no longer felt empty. It held a quiet tension, a fragile equilibrium that she was determined to maintain. Hours passed in this suspended state. The sun rose higher, though its light did not reach the chamber fully, leaving the space half-shadowed and half-lit in a subtle gradient that seemed almost intentional. Evelyn's gaze softened as she studied the beast, noticing details she had not before. The delicate curve of his jaw, the way his fur rippled with each breath, the subtle rise and fall of his chest, a pulse that reassured her that her efforts were not in vain. And as the first clear light of morning crept across the stones, she realized that the night had passed without incident, that her decision to remain, to bear the cold, and to offer steady presence had mattered in ways she could not fully comprehend. Yet she understood deeply. She had changed the outcome, if only slightly. And that small shift of choice carried with it a weight of consequence that would extend beyond the tower walls and into the wider world that awaited them. The first rays of sunlight stretched through the tower windows, but Evelyn did not rise. She remained where she had settled hours ago, careful not to disturb the creature beside her. His breathing was steadier now, the rhythm of life strong enough to reassure her that her presence had mattered. The chamber, still cloaked in the faint gray of early morning, felt warmer somehow, as if the connection between them had shifted the air itself. She allowed herself a moment to observe every detail. The way his massive shoulders relaxed against the stone, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and the subtle twitch of his ears that hinted at a consciousness more aware than the night had revealed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the snowy northern forest, crisp and invigorating, and Evelyn imagined the vastness of the world beyond the tower, a place where power and legend ruled, yet where kindness often went unnoticed. She thought of the choices that had led her here, the quiet obedience, the unnoticed efforts, the small acts of care that no one else had acknowledged, and she realized that the sum of these had become something greater. She had chosen to stay, not out of hope for reward, not from expectation of recognition, but because it was the right choice, the human choice, the act of courage without fanfare. The creature stirred lightly, shifting its weight, and Evelyn instinctively moved closer, pressing a hand against the thick fur along his side. She could feel a gentle warmth spreading through her own body, a reflection of the life she was nurturing, a bond that required no words. In that silence, her mind wandered to the stories of old, tales of kings who ruled without compassion, of beasts bound by curse or destiny, and of the rare moments when mercy and steadfastness altered the course of history. Perhaps, she thought, this was one such moment. As the morning deepened, golden light pooled across the stone floor, touching both of them, highlighting the contrast between the fragile figure of an omega and the enormous, powerful form of the beast. And yet, in that light, there was no disparity, only a shared moment of survival, a testament to courage and attention, to the quiet influence of presence. Evelyn adjusted herself again, careful not to jostle him, and allowed her gaze to rest on the smallest details, the subtle rhythm of his breathing, the warmth in his fur, the slight tension that remained in his massive limbs. All of it spoke of life continuing, of a being previously assumed lost now sustained. She pressed her hand once more, silently affirming her choice to remain, to endure the cold and the weight of solitude, understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery were the ones that went unseen, that the saving of a life did not always require fanfare or glory, but simply the commitment to be present when all else was absent. Outside the tower, the snow glistened in the rising sun, each flake catching the light as though celebrating the small miracle within. But inside the chamber, the world had condensed into a single, unspoken promise. She would remain, and she would protect the fragile thread of life beside her until the first true signs of the day reached them both. The sunlight continued to spread across the chamber, reaching farther with every passing minute until golden beams stretched across the ancient stones and touched the sleeping creature completely. Evelyn blinked against the brightness and rubbed her tired eyes. She had been awake for nearly an entire day, yet she could not bring herself to leave. Something deep inside her insisted that this moment mattered. The air itself felt different. Warmer. Lighter. As though a burden carried by the tower for years had finally begun to lift. She noticed it first in the silence. The oppressive heaviness that had greeted her when she arrived was fading. Even the wind outside seemed gentler now, no longer howling against the walls, but whispering softly through the broken windows. Evelyn glanced toward the beast and immediately sat upright. His breathing had changed again. Not weaker this time. Stronger. More controlled. Every rise and fall of his chest carried a steadiness that had been absent throughout the night. Relief washed through her. She smiled without realizing it. "You are getting better," she whispered. "I knew you could." The creature remained motionless, but the faintest movement passed through the fur along his shoulders, like a ripple traveling across still water. Evelyn tilted her head. For a second, she thought it was a trick of the sunlight. Then it happened again. A strange shimmer moved across his massive form. She pulled back slightly, uncertain. The air around him seemed to hum with quiet energy. The golden light pouring through the windows intensified, reflecting across the chamber walls until every corner glowed with a soft radiance. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. She had never witnessed magic before, yet instinct told her that something extraordinary was unfolding. The creature exhaled slowly. Then another wave of shimmering light flowed across him. This time it lingered. The enormous frame she had watched over all night seemed to soften around the edges. The heavy shadows surrounding him receded. Evelyn could only stare. Minutes passed, or perhaps seconds. Time itself felt uncertain. The tower remained perfectly silent as the transformation continued beneath the growing sunlight. Finally, the strange glow faded. Evelyn blinked repeatedly, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The massive beast was gone. In his place lay a man. Her breath caught. He appeared to be only a few years older than she was, tall even while resting against the stone floor. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and sunlight illuminated features that seemed carved from the same mountains surrounding the kingdom. Yet, it was not his appearance that held her attention. It was the exhaustion she recognized immediately. The same exhaustion she had seen in the creature's eyes during the night. The same loneliness. The same pain. They had never disappeared. They simply belonged to someone else now. Evelyn remained frozen as realization slowly settled over her. This was not merely a cursed man. This was someone who had carried an impossible burden for a very long time. As though sensing her gaze, his eyes slowly opened. Silver. Bright silver, reflecting the morning light like polished steel. Their eyes met. For several heartbeats, neither spoke. Neither moved. Then confusion flickered across his expression before being replaced by surprise. His gaze shifted briefly around the chamber and then returned to her. Finally, his voice broke the silence, rough from disuse, yet unmistakably human. "You stayed." The simple words struck Evelyn harder than any grand speech ever could, because hidden within them was something she understood completely. Not gratitude, not disbelief, relief. The relief of someone who had expected to wake up alone once again and discovered, for the very first time in years, that someone had chosen not to leave. For a moment, Evelyn could not answer. She simply stared at him, trying to reconcile the exhausted man before her with the creature she had spent the entire night protecting. The silver eyes watching her were the same eyes that had followed her movements in the darkness, the same eyes that had carried quiet fear and silent hope. Nothing about them had changed. "I could not leave," she said softly at last. The man studied her as though the words themselves were unfamiliar. A strange expression crossed his face, something between disbelief and wonder. Then he looked away, his gaze drifting toward the sunlight pouring through the broken windows. Most people do. The honesty in his voice settled heavily between them. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She did not know what to say to that. Somehow she sensed that this was not a complaint. It was simply a fact he had accepted long ago. The silence stretched comfortably. Outside, snow continued to sparkle beneath the morning sun. Inside the tower, the years of loneliness seemed almost visible around him, woven into every movement, every careful breath. Finally, he pushed himself upright. The effort appeared to cost him more energy than he wanted to admit. Instinctively, Evelyn moved forward. "You should rest." His eyes flickered toward her. "You sound as though you have done this before." She smiled faintly. "I spent most of my childhood rescuing things." The corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it transformed his entire face. Things, birds, stray animals, anything injured, and they all survived? Evelyn hesitated. Not all of them. The admission surprised even her. But I stayed anyway. Something shifted in his expression at those words. Not because they were remarkable, but because he seemed to understand them completely. He looked at her for a long moment before quietly asking, "Why?" Evelyn frowned. "Why what? Why stay when you know you might fail?" The question lingered in the air. She thought about it carefully. Then she shrugged. "Because everyone deserves at least one person who tries." The chamber fell silent once more. The sunlight brightened around them, illuminating the ancient stone walls that had witnessed countless lonely mornings. Yet this morning felt different. The man turned away, but not before Evelyn noticed the emotion that flashed briefly through his silver eyes. It was not gratitude. It was something deeper, something that seemed to catch him off guard, as though her simple answer had reached a place inside him untouched for years. Footsteps suddenly echoed from somewhere beyond the tower door. Heavy, fast. Multiple voices followed. Evelyn straightened immediately. The man beside her did not react with surprise. Instead, a weary resignation crossed his features. Seconds later, the massive wooden doors opened. 3 figures entered the chamber and stopped so abruptly it was almost comical. Their eyes widened. One older man with silver hair looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Another dropped the stack of papers he had been carrying. The youngest simply stared. None of them were looking at Evelyn. Their attention remained fixed entirely on the man standing beside her. The silence stretched. Then the older man stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Your Majesty." Evelyn blinked. Her heart skipped. The words echoed inside her mind. "Your Majesty." Slowly she turned toward the man she had spent the night protecting. The man whose loneliness she had recognized. The man whose life she had refused to abandon. And for the first time, she realized exactly who he was. The title struck Evelyn harder than she expected. "Your Majesty." The words echoed through the chamber while the older man and the others remained frozen in place, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She looked from them to the man beside her, and suddenly dozens of unanswered questions rushed together. The abandoned tower, the hopeless atmosphere, the servants who had stopped coming, the stories whispered throughout the northern territories about a ruler cursed by forces nobody could explain. It all fit together now. This was Rowan Blackthorn, Alpha King of the North. Yet somehow the revelation changed less than she thought it would. The silver eyes meeting hers were still the same eyes she had watched throughout the night. The loneliness she had seen was still there. The exhaustion was still there. He was a king, but he was also the man who had quietly asked why she stayed when she knew she might fail. The older advisor stepped forward carefully. "We searched every record, every healer, every scholar. No one has survived a full night in this tower with you for nearly 7 years. His voice trembled slightly. "And yet here you are." Rowan said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on Evelyn. It was a look she could not quite understand. Not because it was intense, but because it was so focused, as though everyone else in the room had faded into the background. One of the younger attendants finally noticed her standing nearby. "Who is she?" The question broke the silence. The advisor followed his gaze and seemed to notice Evelyn for the first time. Surprise crossed his face. "An Omega?" he asked softly. Rowan answered before anyone else could speak. "Her name is Evelyn Hart." The simple statement carried unexpected weight. Evelyn was not accustomed to hearing her name spoken with such certainty. Usually people forgot it moments after introductions. Yet Rowan spoke it as though it mattered. The advisor nodded respectfully toward her. "Then Miss Hart has accomplished what an entire kingdom could not." Evelyn immediately shook her head. "I did not do anything extraordinary." "You stayed," Rowan said quietly. The room fell silent again. Evelyn looked toward him. The same words. Again. This time she realized he was not speaking about survival. He was speaking about something far more personal. The advisor exchanged a glance with the others. They clearly understood something she did not. After several uncomfortable moments, Rowan finally turned away. "Prepare the council chamber," he said. "I will meet them before noon." Shock flashed across every face. "Today?" one attendant blurted out. Rowan lifted an eyebrow. "Is there a reason I should not?" Nobody answered. The advisor looked as though he might cry from relief. They quickly excused themselves and hurried from the room. Moments later the chamber was quiet once more. Only Rowan and Evelyn remained. She expected him to thank her and leave. Instead, he continued standing near the window, watching snow drift across the distant mountains. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "You should have gone home hours ago." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Probably. Then why are you still here?" She considered the question. "I wanted to make sure you were really awake." Rowan looked back at her. For the first time, a genuine smile appeared. It was brief, almost reluctant, but unmistakably real. And something inside him shifted. Not because she had saved his life. Not because she had broken a curse. But because after years of waking to empty rooms and closed doors, he had opened his eyes and found one person who chose to stay until the very end. The kingdom spent weeks trying to explain what had happened inside the tower. Scholars searched ancient records. Advisors debated forgotten prophecies. Healers studied every detail they could uncover. Yet none of them found an answer that satisfied Rowan. They spoke of rare magic. They spoke of fate. They spoke of destiny. But Rowan remembered the truth. He remembered the freezing stone floor. He remembered opening his eyes and finding someone still there. Every explanation offered by the kingdom felt incomplete because none of them understood the one detail that mattered most. Evelyn had not stayed because she expected a reward. She had not known who he was. She had not known a crown waited beneath the curse. She had simply seen someone suffering and refused to abandon him. That truth followed Rowan everywhere. During council meetings, during diplomatic gatherings, during long evenings when reports covered his desk, his advisors quickly noticed the change. The Alpha King who once moved through life with cold distance now found himself distracted by simple questions. Had Evelyn eaten breakfast? Was she comfortable in the guest wing? Did she have everything she needed? The concern puzzled everyone except Rowan himself. He understood exactly what was happening. For years, people had approached him because of his title, his power, or their own ambitions. Evelyn was different. She had expected nothing. That made her impossible to forget. Meanwhile, Evelyn struggled to understand the sudden attention surrounding her. Servants bowed when she passed. Nobles asked for introductions. Even members of her old pack began sending letters filled with praise they had never offered before. The change made her uncomfortable. Nothing about her felt different. She was still the same Omega who had spent years being overlooked. Yet one afternoon while walking through the palace gardens, she finally asked Rowan the question that had been weighing on her heart. "Why is everyone treating me like I did something extraordinary?" Rowan stopped beside a fountain sparkling beneath the afternoon sun. For several seconds, he watched the water before answering. "Because they think you saved the king." Evelyn looked down. "But I did not." A faint smile touched his face. "I know." She blinked in surprise. "You do?" Rowan nodded. "The kingdom believes you broke a curse." His silver eyes met hers. "I believe you did something much harder." Evelyn frowned slightly. "What is harder than that?" Rowan's expression softened. "You reminded someone how it feels not to be alone." The words stole her breath. For a moment, neither spoke. The garden around them seemed to fade away beneath the quiet weight of honesty. Then Rowan did something unexpected. He stepped forward and offered her his hand. Not as a king issuing a command. Not as an alpha asserting authority. Simply as a man making a choice. Evelyn looked at the offered hand and then at the man before her. The lonely ruler. The exhausted soul hidden behind years of duty and silence. Slowly she smiled and accepted it. Warm sunlight spilled across the garden as they stood together. And far above them, beyond the palace towers and mountain peaks, the winter sky stretched endlessly blue. The kingdom would tell the story one way. They would say an Omega saved a king. They would speak of curses, miracles, and destiny. But Rowan knew the truth. A forgotten girl had chosen to stay when everyone else walked away. And that was the night he never truly recovered from. Because after experiencing that kind of kindness, he never wanted to live without it again.